Wow. Delegates of the Indigenous Congress 2022, we are listening to the Honorable Senator Mary Jane McCallum. Senator, in one question, you unpacked a lot of things. Some I want to quickly highlight. You said assimilation is not inclusion. The fact that you're trying to, let's assimilate them, that means you're still excluding them, but you are trying to please yourself that you are doing something. My goodness, and I hope you're all listening to this. Those of you trying to do diversity work in your organization, let's assimilate them is not inclusion. The senator says, your voice is your wealth. My goodness, I've never heard that before. Never, that your voice. I've heard your vote. People talk of vote, but she's saying your voice, you know, and she went on to explain how that voice was taken by making people feel they are a sinner, to the extent that some choose to be left behind. In addition to the multitude, the system is systematically leaving behind. We have a very serious situation on our hand. And the senator also talked about compassion. There's no course in school. University of Toronto or any high school don't say we have a course on compassion. She said you learn that. She even went ahead to show how you could be sucked into the colonial mindset of you versus them, until she had to recognize that, hold on a second, there's no me versus them, there's a we. Senator, my goodness, thank you for that. I'll ask you one more question and then give opportunity to my colleagues to ask one more. You've already answered many of the questions I had. You've talked about the wealth, you've talked about the trauma, you've talked about being left behind, some choosing to, and then you also talked about people are in different stages. You know, I've often heard and actually thought of, you know, if it can happen to you, if you can go to a residential school for 11 years, go out, become a known dentist, do great work and become a senator, then anybody can do that. That's a motivational talk. That's not true. That's not true, because everybody, according to the senator, and I'm inclined to, you know, buy into this conversation, according to the senator, everybody are in different phases of the being left behind. Yep. Everybody felt the pain differently, and everybody have their own story and their own experience. So thank you for that. So one more question, as I said, and then I'll bring in Desiree Souza, our community development manager, to ask a question. So Senator, you are now in the Senate. You went from residential school to the Senate, which is outstanding. And obviously you talked about you choose, even till now, choose to still not be left behind. You are choosing to catch the bus. You're choosing to create the opportunity for other people, especially indigenous people. What do you think, or perhaps do you think the government is doing enough to bridge the gap they created through the residential school? You know, of course, people can reference, oh, the government said they will donate this money or put this money or pay this settlement. The Pope visited Canada. We hear of all this, what I call political points being scored. However, what's the reality, Senator?
Okay, before I speak about that, I would like to go just a bit back.
Okay.
And look at how do you generate wealth for those left behind in the different states.
Yes,
and
please.
That is where you see people going back to the land. You hear all these success stories of people challenging the government. And you see that Siksika Nation now is going to take up its own police force. And you look at all the people that are going back to the land teachings, and doing that in their languages, you know, and that is the different groups, the grassroots people working with grassroots, because they understand, you know, intimately what is needed at the ground level. And they're working with them, and they're helping them to deal with generating the wealth, their own definition of wealth. And for some, it's like regaining your language. You know, to me, that is wealth. I'm learning my language again, and I really, really envy people that are fluent in Cree. You know, and it's so I'm slowly getting there. And for some people, it would be starting to understand parenting and what comes with that, you know, and for youth to understand. I think one of that the youth have very little voice in the system. You know, they have been left behind in a lot of different ways. You know, in their youth, it's there's a bill coming up. It's Vote 16. It's
Okay.
the ability of youth to vote at 16.
Oh, wow.
And I'm doing a speech on it maybe next week when I'm there. And it's to support that, because we need to challenge the students to do critical thinking and to also start to give voice to what their issues are, because they're going to inherit the world, right?
Yes.
And they're already so articulate on their concerns, and I've heard them. They come to Senate and we meet with them, and you know, and that's a particular part of the country. All youth, it doesn't matter the nationality, that have been left behind. And when people say to me, but youth are, you know, they're not ready. And I said, you know, society made them like that. When my parents were 16, they could have voted. They already had a family, they had, you know, their life. They were and so I think a lot of other parents and society has slowly started to, for some reason, not challenge our students. And it's a lot of memory work that they do in the schools. There's very little critical thinking, very little social justice that's happening and being discussed. And it is happening in Winnipeg, because I've gone to speak to students. So, you know, that generation of wealth will be mean different things to many different people. And there was a young woman that lived with her mom and her children. And then she said, I would like a house. And she got a house, you know, on the reserve. When she got the house, she realized it wasn't important for her. She wanted an education now. So the wealth changed.
Yes.
As you get it, right? So when you look at what Indigenous people are doing across the land, and now they're getting more articulate with the government and what they need, but the system still doesn't exist to be able to flow the money directly to the bands. It's all done with projects, and different people, including non-Indigenous people, tap into those funds. So it doesn't all reach First Nations. And I have to look at the laws the legislation. We haven't done anything to look at the inbred systemic racism that exists on Parliament Hill, which is the most colonial structure in Canada.
Yes.
Haven't done anything.
Wow.
So just bringing in people of, you know, the Black, the Indigenous, the people of color into Senate, into the House of Commons, doesn't mean that that things have changed. We're still passing colonial laws. We're still colonizing people. Wow. And at some point, we have to look at how do we do that? You know, and I'm getting some lawyers to come in and do a webinar, because I'm concerned about the laws we pass. So they created the gap, and it's very difficult, I think, for the state to correct what it has done when it has created it. So how can they be the ones that come up with a solution? Because they did it. So why are we depending on the state? We need to challenge them, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was Albert Einstein who said you cannot solve a problem with the same mindset that created the problem in the first place.
Yes.
You said something very interesting. We are depending on the most colonial structure in the country, which is the parliament. That is the fact that they brought in indigenous senator, brought in a black senator, does not mean that the system is still not the same, and that laws are still being passed that are colonial laws that are still being passed. Wow. Senator, since you talked about youth in your response, I'm going to ask Chrissy Benz to replace me right now with Desiree Souza, who is a youth, and she has a question to ask the senator. Desiree Souza, please come on and interact with our senator.
Sure thing. I guess focusing on the topic of government and you working in the Senate for a number of years, I guess my question would be, have you faced any backlash from your community? Kind of feeling like an in-between state of like working for the Senate, but also being in your community. I feel like you've talked about the work that you've done throughout, but I feel like I just wanted to know a little bit of background if you faced any issues in that sort of aspect.
No, there hasn't been backlash because I've worked very closely with grassroots people across Canada. And when we're on the floor, we call them and say, I'm going to do the speech now, or the committee, or you need to send this in. You need to ask to come to committee. But so because we work so closely to them, they have actually, we've gotten so many requests now to work with them. And one example is energy that, you know, I'm on the energy committee, and I will say I get a lot of flack from Senate, not from the community.
Wow, that's great. I feel like that's not it's great to know like your perspective on it, because that's not necessarily the way that I would think it would be. And I feel like a lot of other youth would think it'd be the opposite way. So that's great to hear that your community really supports you.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the main importance, I guess, is your community to back you up rather than, you know, like you said earlier, being like assimilated and focusing more on what people want from you, just doing what's best for you personally and your community. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, and that's thank you so much, Senator, and thank you, Desiree, for that question. If any backlash, the senator said, is from the Senate and not from the people, because the senator, Mary Jane McCallum, represents the people. So I will invite Henry Luyombia, who is our Director of Admin and Mental Health, and also the head of Atlantic Canada, Jenny from PEI, that is currently out of power, out of internet, and out of water, in a state of emergency following the hurricane. So Henry, thank you for still joining us. I heard you're in the community center. So if there's some noise in the background, please, everybody excuse us. Henry is currently joining from here. Henry, go ahead and ask your question to the senator.
Senator Jane McCallum, my question is very simple. To the delegates who may not know what to do, but are willing to listen, to learn, and to do something, what kind of message can you offer to them? They're across Canada. What can they do on an individual level to make sure that the gaps can be reduced or eliminated?
I had, there was one teaching that I was given, and it is that when you meet people on the street, that you acknowledge them. Because when you've been seen as an invisible person or as an object, and you've been, like ignored, which is a way of being left behind, you're ignored, or you're, people just walk by. And I was told, you look at the person and you say, how are you today? And even with the people that are on the street, panhandling, people don't look at them. And it's, you look at them and say, how are you today? Even though you don't give them money. That acknowledgement that you are a human being and that you matter makes such a big difference. And, when I go anywhere, like if I go to the store and I buy something, or if anybody says to me, how are you? I'll say, I'm fine. And how are you? And people are a bit shocked. It doesn't matter who it is. And just to start that conversation that everybody does matter. And so I'll ask them, how are you back? And it's rare that people acknowledge that. They'll just say, I'm fine, and continue, right? And and then I'll just say, have a wonderful day when I leave, and thank them. And I think that kind of conversation adds a lot, because when somebody does that to me, when someone acknowledges me, whether I'm in a restaurant and they come, I really so appreciate it that I exist. So I think that is one. The other one is, I think that when you're sitting around the table eating, it's a good time to bring in, to have a conversation with your children about different aspects of the world that we see. And that's how politics is discussed around, the dinner tables. So, and one of the lawyers, after I had done my speech on maybe 3 years ago, he said, I'm so sorry that I've ignored this. He said, now I'm going to start talking to my children at the dinner table about residential school, and it's not only Indigenous people, it's all people of color, and it includes the new citizens that are coming into Canada, and how we welcome them and how we interact, especially the ones coming from war-torn countries, because they're dispossessed in many ways. And when you're dispossessed, at least we don't dispossess you of your spirit. We just say, hi, with a smile.
Very important.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I wear this every child matters, and I remind my children that you matter and you are part of the world. Thank you very much, Senator Jen McCallum.
Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, the Honorable Senator.